I want to start by telling you that I am not someone who frightens easily. I want to tell you that, and I want you to believe it, because everything that comes after depends on you understanding that I am a person with a reasonable relationship to the world. I pay my bills on time mostly. I keep my car's oil changed on the correct schedule. I have a sister in Portland whom I call every other Sunday, and when she asks me how I'm doing, I say fine and mean it in the way that most people mean it, which is to say, adequately, sufficiently, alive and functional, and not thinking too hard about anything. I am telling you this because I need you to understand who I was before Aldermore Regional High School, before the night shifts, before the attendance. I need you to understand that whatever happened to me happened slowly and quietly and in the most procedural way imaginable, and that by the time I understood what I was experiencing, I had already been experiencing it for weeks. That, I think, is the part that stays with me most. Not any single moment, not any single sound. The accumulation. The position. I took the job in October. That's relevant, I think, because October at Aldermore means the heating system has just been switched on for the first time since the previous spring, and the whole building smells of old warmth and something underneath it, something papery and mineral, like the inside of a filing cabinet that has been closed for a long time, like documents, like a certain quality of institutional air that belongs specifically to places where large numbers of people have been processed through paperwork. The school was built in 1961. You can tell. The ceilings in the main corridors are suspended tile, and the tiles are that particular shade of yellowed white that exists only in institutional buildings from that era, as though the building itself absorbed decades of fluorescent light and gave it back in a diminished form. The lockers are painted a green so dark it reads almost black in low light. The floors are composite tile that flecked grey-beige that is somehow neither clean nor dirty at any given moment, that exists in a permanent state of ambiguity. I was hired as the Evening Facilities Coordinator, which is the title the district used for what was, in practical terms, the night custodian. The previous person in the role had left without notice in late September. HR described this as a sudden career transition, which I understood to mean they didn't know exactly why he'd left either, or didn't want to say. My hours were 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., Monday through Friday, with occasional Saturdays during event season. I was responsible for mopping and sweeping the main corridors, emptying waste bins in classrooms and offices, checking the exterior doors on each circuit, maintaining the supply closets in each wing, and logging any maintenance issues I found during my rounds in the district's work order system. A piece of software so old that it still defaulted to Internet Explorer and displayed everything in a font that I recognized from Windows 95. I was the only person in the building after 7:30. The last teachers left between 6 and 6:30. The evening administrative staff, a woman named Renata who managed after-school program logistics, left at the 7:15 without fail. She always stopped to speak to me on her way out, always said the same things. Anything I should know about, and then have a quiet night, and then the particular sound of the main entrance's push bar mechanism engaging, and the building would contract into itself, and I would be alone with 11,000 square feet of hallway and the fluorescent lights, which buzzed with a frequency that I noticed consciously for the first week and then stopped noticing, the way you stop noticing the sound of your own refrigerator. The first 3 weeks were without incident. I want to be precise about that. I want to be careful with the word incident because later it becomes important to distinguish between what was unusual and what was frightening. And these two things have different timelines. 2. 9:47. The first time it happened, I was in the East Wing. It was a Wednesday. I had finished the main corridor and was working the East Wing classrooms, emptying the small grey recycling bins beside each teacher's desk, loading them onto the wheeled cart. I pushed ahead of me the cart with the squeaky front left wheel that I'd submitted a work order for and which had not yet been addressed. The squeaking echoed in the empty hallway with a regularity that I'd begun to find almost comforting, a kind of pulse, proof of my own presence. The rain had started around 8. Not heavy, this was not a dramatic storm. It was the specific quality of autumn rain that falls without ambition, that exists simply to be grey and consistent, that fogs the narrow windows at the tops of the East Wing classrooms and renders the parking lot outside into a monochrome photograph. I remember looking at the clock mounted at the end of the East Corridor. It was analog, white-faced, with a black second hand that moved in that institutional tick-pause-tick rhythm, not smooth, but deliberate, segmented, as though time in a school building operates differently than it does outside. 9:47. The PA system engaged. I know the specific sound it makes because after that night, I paid close attention. It begins with a soft click, not loud, not startling. The click of a relay switching somewhere in the building's electrical infrastructure. Then a half second of carrier tone, which is not quite silence and not quite static, but something precisely between the two. Then the voice. The voice is female, recorded, completely, entirely calm, the calm of a voice that has never needed to worry about whether anyone is listening, that has no investment in response. It is the voice of a system reading from a list, attendance confirmation. Period 7. Please respond when called. I stopped pushing the cart. I don't know why I stopped. There was no reason to stop. I had no particular relationship to the PA system. It was not my equipment to manage or monitor. And yet I stopped, and I stood in the East Corridor with my hands on the cart handles and my cart's front left wheel no longer squeaking, and I listened. Alderton, Patricia. A pause. 3 seconds, perhaps 4. Bellamy, Curtis. Another pause. Bellamy, Curtis, it repeated, then moved on. Carver, Donna, Chen, Marcus, Dylan, Thomas, Dylan, Thomas. The names continued for what I later estimated was approximately 4 minutes. I stood in the East Corridor for all of it. My cart was at a slight angle to the wall because I'd stopped pushing mid-stride and had not corrected it. I remember noticing this, the angle of the cart, and not doing anything about it. When the system disengaged, it did so with another click. The carrier tone lasted a half second and then was gone, and the corridor was exactly as quiet as it had been before, except that the quality of the quiet was different. Not the quiet of an empty building, the quiet of a held breath. I stood there for another minute, maybe longer. Then I straightened my cart and continued down the corridor. At the end of my shift, I logged the event in the work order system under the category Electrical P/AV systems described it as a system activated unprompted at approximately 21:47, ran for approximately 4 minutes, appeared to read a student list. No one else present. I submitted the ticket and drove home. That night, I slept without difficulty. That, I would later understand, was the last night I slept without difficulty for quite some time. 3. What administration? Said the work order was closed the following Tuesday. I know because the system sends an automated email when a ticket is resolved, and the email contains the resolution note. The resolution note in its entirety read, P. A system reviewed. No fault detected. Scheduling feature operating as intended. Thank you for your report. Operating as intended. I read that phrase 4 times before I closed the email. I considered, for a moment, replying and asking what, specifically, the intended function was. I considered asking who had scheduled the attendance announcement and for what purpose, and whether it was normal for an automated attendance system to operate at 9:47 in the evening in an empty building. I did not reply. I filed the email in a folder I created and labeled Building Miss C. And I went to work that evening, and I told myself it was a legacy system, a scheduling error, something left over from a previous configuration that no one had thought to disable. These things happen in old buildings. Systems develop phantom behaviors. Schedules persist beyond their purpose. I had worked in a hospital once, briefly, the summer after college, and there had been an automated intercom announcement there that played every day at noon, a reminder about a staff meeting that had last occurred in 2009, and nobody had known how to turn it off. And eventually, everyone had simply stopped hearing it. Institutions have memories, that's all. They carry forward routines that outlive their reasons. I told myself this. I almost believed it. 4. The second time, and the third. The following Wednesday, 9:47, the PA engaged again. Attendance confirmation. Period 7. Please respond when called. I was in the main corridor this time, near the administrative wing. I stopped walking. I waited. The names came in the same order. Alderton, Bellamy, Carver, Chen. Dylan and I counted them this time, quietly, standing in the corridor with the rain on the windows and the fluorescent lights humming above me at that particular frequency that I had stopped consciously noticing, but which I now noticed again, the way you notice a sound when something else forces your attention to stillness. 23 names. Exactly 23. I wrote them down in the small spiral notebook I'd started carrying specifically for this purpose, standing in the corridor with my back against a row of lockers, their cold metal conducting through my jacket. I wrote quickly, in the abbreviated shorthand I developed from years of taking inventory. When the system disengaged, I had all 23. I went home that night and spent 2 hours looking for them online. I found almost nothing. This is not as unusual as it sounds. I was searching for common names: Bellamy, Curtis, Chen, Marcus, Dylan, Thomas, without any additional identifiers, and the results were predictably useless. I tried combining names with the school's name, with the district's name, with nothing specific. What I found, eventually, buried in a local paper's digital archive from 2003, was a single article about Aldermore Regional's 20th reunion, a class of 1983. The article was brief and perfunctory. The kind of community interest piece that fills column inches on slow news days, and it contained a list of alumni who had attended the event. Among the names on the list of attendees: Curtis Bellamy, now of Charleston; Marcus Chen, unable to attend, deceased 2001. Marcus Chen, on my list, deceased 2001. I sat with that for a while. Then I told myself that it was a common name, that Marcus Chen was not necessarily this Marcus Chen, that the attendance list almost certainly predated 2001, and that the system was simply reading from old records, and that none of this was necessarily remarkable. The third Wednesday, I counted again. 24 names, 23 as before. And then at the end, after the pause that usually preceded the system's disengagement, Harmon, Julie, new. I had not heard Harmon, Julie before. 5. The records room. I want to be clear that I was not supposed to access the records room. It was not part of my assigned area. It was specifically listed in the facilities manual as a restricted space requiring administrative authorization, and the key was kept on a separate ring in the supply office. I also want to be clear that the supply office was part of my assigned area, that I had access to the key rings in the supply office as part of my regular duties, and that on the Thursday following the third attendance announcement, I stood in the supply office for approximately 90 seconds before taking the keyring labeled Records/Archive and walking to the East Wing basement. The records room was not what I'd expected. I'd expected boxes, old student files in cardboard boxes stacked on metal shelving. This is what records rooms look like. In my experience, functional, utilitarian, sad, in the way that all storage of human information is a little sad. What I found was boxes, yes, but also something that I would describe with the full awareness of how this sounds as organized. The boxes were labeled, the labels were dated, they ran in sequence from 1962 to the present year. Each year's records in their own box. The boxes aligned on the shelving with a consistency that suggested someone had cared about this room, cared about it recently. Not just when the records were first filed, but regularly. The floor had been swept. The shelving was not dusty. There was a small folding table near the door with a yellow legal pad on it and a pen clipped to its spiral binding. I looked at the yellow legal pad. Someone had been using it. The handwriting was small and vertical, the kind of handwriting that belongs to people who were taught cursive properly in elementary school and never entirely abandoned it. The list, because it was a list, ran down the page in columns, names, dates. Beside each name, a notation in a second column. The notations were not always legible. Some were abbreviations I didn't recognize, but the ones I could read were things like confirmed grad and transfer out, spring 89, and several times, status unknown, and twice, underlined, deceased. I looked at the names on the legal pad. I looked at the list in my spiral notebook. I compared them. Bellamy, Curtis, on the legal pad, confirmed grad, class of 83. Chen, Marcus, on the legal pad, deceased, 2001, auto accident, family notified. I turned to the next page of the legal pad. At the top, in the same small vertical handwriting, was a single line. Harmon, Julie enrollment records not found. Cross-referenced district files, and below it, underlined twice, with what I can only describe as urgency in the pen pressure. Who added this name? I put the legal pad back exactly as I had found it. I replaced the key. I finished my shift. I drove home and sat in my car in my driveway for 15 minutes before I went inside. In the morning, I called Renata. 6. What Renata said and did not say. Renata's voicemail greeting is professional and warm. She says her name and the district and asks you to leave a message, and she will return your call within 1 business day. Her return call came 4 days later, on a Monday morning while I was sleeping, because I work nights and sleep until noon, and her call came at 8:17 a.m., which is to say she called me while I was deeply asleep, and I woke to the sound of my phone and answered it without thinking. "I got your message," she said, "about the PA system." "Yes," I said. I was sitting up in bed, still mostly asleep, my eyes adjusting to the grey morning light. "The system runs an automatic sequence on Wednesday evenings," she said. "It's a legacy feature. It's been doing it for years. I should have mentioned it during orientation. I apologize for that." Her voice was perfectly even. Not rehearsed. I want to be careful about saying that, because I know how it sounds, but practiced. The way someone sounds when they have said the same thing many times and have processed it to the point where it no longer requires much of their attention. The way someone sounds when a subject has been closed. "What's it reading from?" I asked. "The list." "What are the names?" A brief pause. Half a breath. "Former students. Archival data." The system was originally set up for attendance monitoring in some kind of pilot program, I think, from the early 2000s. They never fully decommissioned it. It's on the list to be addressed in the next facility's upgrade cycle. "One of the names is a student who's deceased," I said. "The records are old," she said. "That's not unusual, unfortunately." "Last week, there was a new name," I said. "A name that wasn't in the previous weeks." This pause was longer. "I'll have someone look at it," she said. "There's a legal pad in the records room," I said. Someone was already looking into it. The names, the attendance list. "Do you know who will have someone look at it?" she said again. And this time, there was something beneath the evenness. Not anger, nothing as direct as that. Something more like a door being gently but firmly closed. "Thank you for flagging it. Have a good shift tonight." She hung up. I lay back down in my bed and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep again that morning. 7. November arrived the way it does in this part of the country, without ceremony, without any particular acknowledgement that October had ended. Just a gradual greying of everything. The light through the school's windows changed quality. It became thinner, more attenuated, as though the distance between the window glass and the fluorescent tubes had increased. The rain became more frequent and colder. The heating system in the east wing began to fail intermittently, producing a sound from the ventilation ducts that I can only describe as recursive, a sound that seemed to respond to itself, a metallic shuddering that would start in the ceiling of one classroom and propagate down the corridor in diminishing repetitions, like an echo that couldn't find the silence it was looking for. I started keeping the notebook with me always. I started arriving 10 minutes early each evening and sitting in my car in the parking lot, watching the building its windows, most of them dark, the occasional yellow square of a classroom where a late teacher was still packing up. I told myself I was simply finishing my coffee. I told myself it was nothing. By the second week of November, I had catalogued 6 Wednesday occurrences. The list had grown each time. Not dramatically, not a sudden doubling or tripling. One name added, sometimes two. Added in the same calm voice, in the same alphabetical order, integrated into the list as though they had always been there. Harmon, Julie remained on the list. I had searched for her extensively by now. The school district's public records portal, the county library's digitized local newspaper archive, the school's own website with its archived yearbook photos going back to 1975. No Harmon, Julie anywhere. Not as a graduate, not as an attendee, not as a transfer, not as anyone. Who added this name? I thought about that handwriting in the records room often. I thought about the pen pressure of that underline. Someone had been asking the same question I was asking, and they had been asking it in a small room in the basement, in neat, vertical cursive, alone. I wondered if they were still at the school. I wondered if they were the person who had left in September, the one whose departure HR had described as a sudden career transition. On the third Wednesday in November, I took up a position near the administrative wing at 9:40. I stood in the corridor, back against the wall, notebook in hand, and I waited. At 9:47, the PA clicked on. Attendance confirmation. Period 7. Please respond when called. I wrote quickly, keeping pace with the voice. Alderton, Patricia, Bellamy, Curtis, Carver, Donna, Chen, Marcus. I wrote. Dylan, Thomas. Dylan, Thomas. The repetition. There was always the repetition, always Dylan. Thomas said twice, with the standard 3 to 4 second pause between them, as though the system were waiting for a response that had never come and had been encoded, somehow, in the pause itself. I wrote. The list continued. 14, 15, 16 names. I was writing and thinking about nothing except keeping pace with the voice, which was why it took me a moment to process what happened when it happened. The voice said, Harmon, Julie. And from the east wing, from somewhere in the east wing corridor, which was dark, which I had not yet cleaned, which was empty, there was a sound, not a voice. I want to be clear about that. A locker. The sound of a locker closing, not slamming, not violently, not dramatically. The sound of a locker being pushed shut by a hand, the soft metallic click of the latch engaging, the sound that lockers make 100 times a day in a school that is full of students and which is utterly, completely distinctive and which carries in an empty hallway with a clarity that makes the air feel strange. One sound, then nothing. I looked at the east wing corridor entrance, dark hallway. The corridor lights had been set to motion activated after 8 p.m. to save electricity, and they were off, which meant that nothing in the east wing had moved in the last several minutes, or rather, nothing large enough to trigger the motion sensors. The BA continued. One more name. After Harmon, a new one. A Rivera. Stephen, who had not been on last week's list. And then the click and the carrier tone and the silence. I stood in the corridor for a long time. I did not go to the east wing that night. I completed my rounds in the west wing and the main corridor and the gymnasium, and at 1:58 a.m. I clocked out and drove home, and I sat in my driveway again, but this time for longer than 15 minutes. 8. The security monitors. The security office is a small room adjacent to the main entrance. It contains a desk, a filing cabinet, a space heater that works intermittently, and a bank of monitors showing feeds from 12 cameras placed throughout the building. The cameras are black and white, low resolution. The frames per second, low enough that motion on screens appears slightly jerky, like old film footage. As facilities coordinator, I had access to this room and used it occasionally to check the exterior cameras during my shift. On the first Wednesday in December, I was in the security office at 9:44. I want to be precise about the time because I had been sitting there since 9:30, watching the monitors, not quite capable of explaining to myself what I expected or hoped to see. The monitors showed what they always showed at that hour: empty. Main corridor, empty. East wing, empty. West wing, empty. Gymnasium, empty. Administrative wing, empty. Faculty parking lot, my car and the rain. Cafeteria, its long tables folded against the walls, the serving windows closed and dark. At 9:47, the PA engaged. Attendance confirmation. Period 7. Please respond when called. I watched the monitors. I told myself I was watching because I was a methodical person, because I believed in documentation, because I needed to see what there was to see and then have an explanation for it. I told myself many things. Alderton, Patricia. Monitor 2. East wing, near the main corridor junction. Empty hallway. Motion activated lights off. Bellamy, Curtis. Monitor 5. West wing, far end. Empty. The trophy case visible at the corridor's end. Its glass front catching a dim reflection of the exit sign above the door. Carver, Donna. Monitor 7. Second floor. I did not often have reason to go to the second floor. The second floor housed administrative offices that were fully locked after hours, and the upper-level classrooms that my circuit didn't include because they were managed by a separate cleaning crew that came on Fridays. Monitor 7 showed the second floor, main corridor, empty, its lights also off. Chen, Marcus. I watched Monitor 7. The motion-activated lights on the second floor flickered on. I watched them come on in sequence, the first fixture, then the second, as something moved from one end of the corridor toward the other, the pattern of activation traveling down the hallway, the way it does when someone is walking beneath the sensors. No one was visible on the monitor. The lights activated in sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, down the second floor corridor in a straight line, as though someone were walking with measured steps, not hurrying. Then they went off again, in the same sequence from the far end back toward the stairwell, as though whatever had triggered them had reversed direction. The corridor was dark. I realized I was gripping the edge of the desk. The PA continued. The list continued. I wrote in my notebook without looking down, my eyes on Monitor 7, which showed only the second floor corridor, dark and still and empty. Harmon, Julie. The second floor lights activated again. This time, only 3 of them clustered around what I knew from the building plans I had reviewed during orientation was the location of the old administrative records room. Not the basement records room I had already visited, but an upper-level annex that had been used for storage since, according to the same building plans, 1999, when the administrative offices were reconfigured. 3 lights. On, Holding, Rivera, Stephen. 2 more names after that. New ones. Salas, Maria, and Whelan. Daniel, and then the click, and the carrier tone, and the silence. The second floor lights remained on for 6 more seconds. Then they went off. I stayed in the security office until 2 a.m. without completing my cleaning rounds, which I had never done before. At the end of my shift, I logged the security system event in the work order system under electrical. Motion sensor, possible malfunction, second floor. I described what I had seen without interpretation. Lights activated in sequence. No visible source of motion detected on camera. I submitted the ticket. The ticket was closed 4 days later. Resolution note. Sensor sensitivity adjusted. Thank you. 9. The name I recognized. The third Wednesday in December, the list had grown to 31 names. I had been cross-referencing every name I could find against any public record the county library's archive contained. Yearbooks digitized in fragments and without consistent indexing. Local newspaper archives that ran from 1954 to 2019 with significant gaps. A county historical society website that was functional in the way that a building is functional when half its rooms are locked and the other half are full of furniture from several different decades. 17 of the 31 names I had found some trace of graduates, mostly a few names that appeared in sports articles or honor roll mentions. 1 name in a brief 2004 obituary. 9 names I could find no record of at all, despite extended searching. Harmon, Julie remained among them, and 5 names I had not yet had time to research. On that third Wednesday, sitting in the security office at 9:45, I opened my notebook to review the previous week's list. While I waited, I had a process now. I'm describing it neutrally. Without the self-consciousness I would have felt if someone were watching me sitting in the security office with a spiral notebook and a red pen, cross-referencing names called by an automated system at 9:47 p.m. in an empty school. I'm describing it neutrally because by this point, it was simply what I did. It had the texture of routine. Even the fear, by this point, had developed a routine quality. It arrived at predictable intervals with a predictable intensity, like the East Wing heating system's recursive shudder. At 9:47, the PA engaged. Attendance confirmation. Period 7. Please respond when called. The list proceeded. I tracked the monitors. The second floor lights did their walking sequence again, from the stairwell end of the corridor to the records annex, on each name, as though each name called corresponded to a presence moving down that hall and stopping. I had given up trying to understand this. I was documenting it. Documentation felt manageable in a way that understanding did not. The new names this week came at the end, after Whelan, Daniel, which was now the second to last position it had held for 2 weeks, Torres, Anna, Vasquez, Ray, and then, after a pause slightly longer than the usual 3 to 4 seconds, a pause of perhaps 6 or 7 seconds, which in the context of the announcement's otherwise metronomic timing felt geological in its length, a final name. Mercer, David. I put down my pen. I looked at my notebook. Mercer, David Mercer. I had looked up David Mercer 2 weeks ago in a fit of thoroughness as part of working through the backlog of unresearched names. I had found him quickly, a 2007 article in the county paper, not buried, not brief, a proper news article. Aldermore Regional had been the dateline. David Mercer, 16, a sophomore, October 2007, found unresponsive in the East Wing boys' restroom after school hours. Cardiac event, the article said, though the word was used in a way that I had found slightly ambiguous. The kind of careful language that journalists use when the full facts are not available or not appropriate for publication. The article mentioned a faculty supervisor who had been in the building at the time and had found him. It mentioned that the investigation had been closed. It mentioned that the school had held an assembly. October 2007, the East Wing. I looked at monitor 2. The East Wing lights were off. Then, as I watched, the nearest set of fixtures, the cluster closest to the East Wing boys' restroom, came on. They stayed on. The PA had disengaged 30 seconds ago. The building was, by every measure, empty. The lights stayed on for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. I watched the timer in the corner of the security monitor. I did not move. I held my pen above the notebook page and did not write anything. When the lights went off, they went off all at once, not in sequence, not traveling down the corridor in the way of something moving, but simultaneously, as though a switch had been thrown. I drove home that night, and I did not sit in my driveway. I went inside, and I sat at my kitchen table, and I called my sister in Portland, even though it was well after 2 a.m., and she answered in the frightened voice of someone woken by a phone call in the middle of the night. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to hear your voice." "Are you okay?" she said. And I thought about what would happen if I told her. I thought about sitting at my kitchen table explaining the PA system and the attendance list and the second floor lights and the locker that had closed itself in the East Wing when Harmon, Julie was called. I thought about the legal pad in the records room and the person who had written "Who added this name?" in small vertical cursive and had then experienced a sudden career transition. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm sorry. Go back to sleep." She said my name in the way that older sisters say your name when they don't believe you. "Really?" I said. "It's nothing. I'm just tired." January. By January, I was sleeping 4 hours a night, sometimes less. This is not traumatic. Sleep deprivation arrives gently, like the rain not as a storm, but as an accumulation, and you don't realize how much you've been soaked through until you try to think clearly and find that the process has changed. That thoughts which previously connected in straight lines now take strange routes. That you'll be in the middle of a task and lose the thread of it. Not dramatically, not in a way that anyone would notice, but in the way of someone whose internal infrastructure is quietly failing. I was still doing my job. I want to be clear about that. The corridors were clean. The work orders were logged. Renata continued to stop by my cart on her way out each evening. Anything I should know about? Have a quiet night. And I continued to say, "Nothing, thanks, and you too," in a voice that I hope was convincing, because the alternative to being convincing was a conversation I did not know how to have. The list was at 37 names. I had been working through the records room systematically. This was perhaps not my best decision, but it was mine, and I made it with the particular focus of someone who has decided that the only way to carry a frightening thing is to carry it toward the light and look at it directly. I went to the records room on my cleaning nights between 10 p.m. and midnight, working through the boxes with a flashlight because I didn't want the lights on and visible under the door on the security monitor, which I realize, even now, is a specific and telling kind of irrationality, the kind of precaution that only makes sense if you've already accepted that something about the building is watching. The class of 1983 records were in good condition. Bellamy, Curtis, confirmed grad, no anomalies. His file contained a transcript, a few teacher evaluations, a photograph from his junior year, a young man with dark eyes and a closed, uncertain smile, wearing a shirt collar that was slightly too large. He looked like every young man from every school photograph from 1981. He looked like someone who had been briefly young and then had gotten on with the process of being something else. I set his file down carefully. Chen, Marcus. His file was thinner. Transcript, one teacher evaluation, and a note clipped to the inside of the folder, a photocopy of a letter from the district office, dated October 2001, addressed to a family address in the county. A letter of condolence, formal, brief, the kind of letter that institutions send when they are sorry and have been told by their legal team how sorry they are allowed to be. Marcus Chen, class of 1983, died October 14th, 2001, survived by his wife and 2 children. I had been looking at his junior year photograph. Dark eyes, different from Bellamy's lighter. Curious, the eyes of someone who is looking at the camera and thinking about something else at the same time. I set his file down. Dylan, Thomas. The file was there. But it was strange. The transcript ended mid-junior year, not at a semester boundary, not at a grade mid-term, in the middle of a semester, as though it had simply stopped being entered. There was a handwritten notation at the bottom of the transcript page in a different handwriting from the typed entries above it. Discontinued enrollment, November 14th. No year. The notation gave no year. There were 3 other notations in the file, all in the same handwriting. The small vertical cursive from the yellow legal pad. One said, "No transfer records found." One said, "Family contact disconnected." And one, at the very bottom of the last page, said only, "Asked why his name appears twice." I sat on the floor of the records room with Thomas Dillon's file in my hands and the flashlight between my teeth, and I reread that line 4 times. Asked why his name appears twice. Someone had been in this room. Someone had been asking the same questions I was asking, had reached the same files I had reached, and had noted the same anomaly I had noticed on the very first night. Dylan, Thomas, Dylan, Thomas, always twice, every week, with a 4-second pause between them. As if the system were waiting for a response that it had been programmed to expect and had never received, as if it had learned over time that it would need to ask again. 11. Harmon, Julie. I found her in February. Not in the school records, not in any record. I found her in the County Historical Society's physical archive, not the website, which was, as I've mentioned, a monument to partial information, but the physical building, which I visited on a Saturday afternoon in the weak February light. The County Historical Society occupies a converted Victorian house on a side street 3 blocks from the county courthouse, and it is staffed by 2 volunteers and maintains an archive of local newspapers, documents, photographs, and ephemera dating to 1877. I spent 4 hours in their reading room. What I found was a photograph, a school photograph, Aldermore Regional class photograph, 1998. The whole junior class arranged on the school's front steps in the late October way, coats on, some of them, the ones who had listened to their parents, and some in shirt sleeves, in a gesture of adolescent defiance toward the cold. rows of faces, names printed in small type beneath each row. I looked at the names in each row. Harmon, Julie, third row from the back, second from the right. I looked at her face. She was looking directly at the camera, not smiling, not hostile, not sad, just not smiling, with the particular composure of someone who has decided to look at the camera honestly rather than perform for it. Dark hair, a slight tilt of the head, barely perceptible, as though she were curious about something just to the left of the photographer. I had found her. I asked the volunteer, a gentle, unhurried woman in her 60s named Margaret, whether they had any records of Aldermore Regional from 1998 beyond the yearbook, whether anything had happened that year, any incidents, any events. Margaret was quiet for a moment. There was the fire, she said. I waited. In the spring, she said. May of 1998. The East Wing. Some kind of electrical fault in the overnight hours. Nobody in the building. Fortunately, it was a Saturday. They contained it before it took the whole wing. She paused. Significant records were lost, though. The district had files stored in the upper annex, the old records room on the second floor. Most of that went. Were students' records lost? I asked. Some, I believe. It was a complicated year for the district. She looked at me with the careful kindness of someone who has noticed that I am asking questions with more urgency than the questions seem to warrant. Were you looking for someone specifically? Harmon, Julie, I said. Class of 1998 or 1999? Margaret was quiet again. I don't know that name, she said, but if her records were in the upper annex, she didn't finish the sentence. I drove back to the school that evening. I sat in the parking lot earlier than usual, 5 p.m., before any of the day's last teachers had left, in the cold February dark, and I looked at the East Wing windows. Some of them were newer than the others. Subtle you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. Slightly cleaner frames, a fractionally different shade of sealant at the edges, the renovated windows, the ones installed after 1998, after the fire that had taken the East Wing and the records room above it. And I now understood. Whatever files had documented the fact that Julie Harmon had attended this school at all. 12. The 38th name. March. A Wednesday. I was waiting, as I always waited now, in the security office at 9:40. Notebook, pen, monitors. The rain, which had continued in its characterless and consistent way since November, as though the sky had simply decided that this was the appropriate weather for this particular school year and had committed to it. 9:47. Attendance confirmation. Period 7. Please respond when called. The list proceeded. I tracked it with the practiced familiarity of someone who has heard the same recording many times, each name in its position, each pause precisely calibrated, each repetition. Dylan Thomas, Dylan Thomas. Arriving with the inevitability of a phrase in a piece of music you know too well. I was watching Monitor 7, the second floor corridor, when Mercer, David, was called. The lights on the second floor activated in their sequence. I had stopped experiencing this with the acute fear of the first time. I experienced it now as something else, something I don't have a clean word for, that sits in the space between dread and recognition. The list continued. Rivera, Stephen, Salas, Maria, Torres, Anna, Vasquez, Ray, Whelan, Daniel. A pause longer than the standard pause. longer than the 6 or 7 seconds that had preceded David Mercer's first appearance on the list. A pause long enough that I looked up from the notebook, because I had been writing as the names were called, and I had stopped writing and I looked up. The carrier tone was still present. The system was still engaged, but no name had come. 8 seconds, 10, and then Fletcher, Ray. I wrote it. I looked at what I had written. Fletcher, Ray. I did not know this name, but I knew something else. This was the longest list the system had ever called. 38 names, and the introduction of a new name at the end. After that anomalous pause, it had never introduced a name that way before, with that breath of hesitation, as though even the system, as though even whatever process was running this list had paused before adding the newest entry. At 10:15, when my rounds had been completed, I went to the supply office and took the records room key. In the basement, in the records room, I found the yellow legal pad. New writing. Recent, the ink was the same pen, the same small vertical cursive, but the entries were dated from the past several weeks, and I had not been in this room since December. A list. Names. The same names I had been documenting, cross-referenced with what I recognized as building incident reports, a form I had seen in the district's maintenance records. Each name paired with a date and a location. Dylan, Thomas East Wing Corridor, November 14th, year not confirmed. Mercer, David East Wing Restroom, October 19th, 2007. Harmon, Julie Records, Annex, 2nd floor, May 2nd, 98. And at the bottom, recent, the ink darker and less settled into the paper than the lines above it. Fletcher, Ray's security office date, TBD. I looked at the date, March, a Wednesday. I looked at the words, security office. I had been in the security office all evening. I had been in the security office when the name was called. I set the legal pad down very carefully. I replaced the key. I walked, not ran, walked up the stairs and down the main corridor to the security office, and I sat at the desk and I looked at the monitors for a long time. Then I looked at the staff directory mounted on the wall of the security office, a laminated sheet, updated periodically, listing all current Aldermore regional staff by role. Under Night Facilities Coordinator, my name, before my name, crossed out in blue ink, a single prior entry. Fletcher, Raymond, 2022 to 2023. The person who had left without notice in September. The person with the small vertical cursive. The person who had been asking who added this name. I understood then. Fletcher, Ray, had not experienced a sudden career transition. Fletcher, Ray, had not left because of anything so voluntary or so clean. Fletcher, Ray, had been in the security office, and now Fletcher Ray was on the list, and I was in the security office. I thought about 38 names. I thought about the way the list had grown, week by week, 1 or 2 names at a time, in the calm and emotionless voice of the system that had no investment in response, that had no reason to stop, that had been operating for decades in an empty building without explanation or acknowledgement, accumulating names the way a filing cabinet accumulates paper, with no regard for what the paper means or who it belonged to. I thought about Harmon, Julie, who had no records, whose records had burned with the East Wing Annex in May of 1998. Who was on the list anyway? I thought about systems that continue after the reasons for them end. The county transit office that still schedules buses for a neighborhood that burned down. The automated meeting reminder that plays every day at noon for a meeting that last occurred in 2009. The attendance system that calls roll for students who have graduated, transferred, died, disappeared, who calls them every Wednesday at 9:47 in an empty building, and waits and calls again, and waits and adds new names when the old names do not answer, because the list must be maintained, because the records must be kept, because the system is operating as intended and no one in administration wants to tell you what the intention is. 13. What I do now. I still work there. I need you to understand that. I still go to work each evening at 6 p.m. I still push my car with the squeaky front left wheel through the corridors. I still exchange my 8-second conversation with Renata on her way out. Anything I should know about. Have a quiet night and say, nothing, thanks, and you too. I have not opened the records room again. I have not submitted any further work orders about the PA system. I have not called my sister again at 2 a.m. The list, as of last week, stands at 39 names. The new name, the one added 3 Wednesdays ago, introduced with the standard alphabetical integration between Bellamy, Curtis, and Carver. Donna is Castillo, Renata. Renata had not been at the building when I arrived for my shift the following Monday. Her office light was off. Her jacket, she always hung her jacket on the hook inside her office door, and it was visible through the door's narrow window, was gone. Her nameplate was still on the desk, the yellow sticky note she kept on her monitor. A reminder to herself about some administrative deadline I had never had reason to ask about was still adhered to the screen. HR, when I called, said she had experienced a sudden career transition. I keep my notebook in my chest pocket now. I keep my pen clipped to the spiral binding. Wednesday evenings. I'm in the security office at 9:40 and I wait. And at 9:47, the PA engages and I track the list and I watch the monitors and I write the names. All 39 of them. And I wait to see what comes after Whelan Daniel. Because something always comes after Whelan Daniel. The system is not finished. I know that now. The system is not a malfunction, and it is not a ghost story, and it is not anything as simple as either of those things. It is a system. It was built for something, or it became something, in the way that all institutional routines eventually become something beyond their original purpose, in the way that a hallway walked by enough people for enough years develops a particular quality of echo, in the way that a building absorbs its history into its concrete and its composite tile and its yellowed ceiling panels, until the history and the building are the indistinguishable. I take attendance every Wednesday, every week. I sit in the security office and I take attendance alongside the system, and I write every name in my notebook, and when the voice is finished, I check my writing against the previous weeks, and I note the changes. I am the only person who is doing this. I am the only person who is keeping a parallel record, who is watching the monitors, who is asking the questions that the legal pad in the basement asked before I arrived, and that I do not write in the legal pad because I have seen what happens to the people whose questions are recorded there. I don't know if it makes a difference. I think it might matter that someone is listening. I think it might matter that The names are heard, not just called into empty corridors, not just read into a recording that responds to no one, but heard, written down, kept. Alderton, Patricia, Bellamy, Curtis, Carver, Donna. I say them quietly, under my breath, when the system calls them. Chen, Marcus, Dylan, Thomas, Dylan, Thomas. I say them as though they are the names of people who were here, as though they deserve to be present in the mind of whoever is occupying the building they occupied, whatever they occupied it for, however briefly and however long ago. Harmon, Julie. She looked directly at the camera. She tilted her head slightly to the left, as though she were curious about something just outside the frame. She did not smile. She was honest. She was briefly young, and then she was a name on a list in an empty school, called at 9:47 on Wednesday evenings, in a calm and emotionless voice, and I am the only person who is saying her name back. I don't know if she can hear me. I say it anyway. The lights in the east wing come on at 9:47. They go off at 9:52, every week, without fail. The system is operating as intended.